Welcome, everybody. Wait a minute. Everybody filter in and sign on, and then we'll get started in about 45 seconds. Thanks so much for everyone for joining us today. I'm Cody Chomiak, Vice President of Industry Engagement for Bandwango. For those of you that are new to Bandwango, we're a technology company that works with destinations across North America and really helps them curate experiences to drive business and support local businesses. We're here today to talk about a very new topic in the travel industry, cannabis. We have with us today Brian Applegarth, the founder of Cultivar Strategies, who's with us today, as well as Todd Aronson, the CEO of Visit Modesto, and Andres Mendez, the Director of Marketing for Visit Modesto. So thank you so much, the three of you, for joining us today.
Happy to be here. Thanks.
Awesome. So, Brian, let's start with you. For those of us that are maybe new and don't know all of the lingo, maybe aren't familiar with the cannabis travel industry, give us an elevator pitch 101 on this industry and what you've been up to.
Sure. Thanks again, Cody, for pulling this panel together. Appreciate it. So yeah, the cannabis travel trend, this is something that's really growing globally. And in a lot of ways, the United States and where I live in California is doing some rapid innovation in the cannabis travel trend. And it really is a travel trend that exists at the core of wellness, which is something that is becoming more and more acknowledged as normalization ensues. And there's really a few different parts to this, with the new travel trend, like cannabis and hemp. The first step is always education and bringing the conversation current. So really allowing everybody to understand what is industrial hemp, what is CBD, what is cannabis, so we can have meaningful conversations about what's possible in a destination. And every destination is unique, as we know, as it should be through travel with this kind of hyper-local focus. But as different cannabis assets unlock, as well as hemp inputs unlock, there's a lot of opportunity to elevate sustainability through industrial hemp, as well as tackle this new really interesting wellness travel trend that's really rooted in CBD and all the therapeutic benefits of the cannabis plant and the hemp plant. And then, of course, steps into the THC-rich conversation of the effects of the cannabis plant and what does that mean for visitors and the visitor economy. How is that impacting the travel ecosystem of a destination, from airports to hotels to marketing strategy? What cannabis assets in a destination are actually marketable and provide a great, visitor experience or hospitality experience, and in a safe way, most importantly, making sure that when visitors show up, there's some guardrails and a curated, normalized experience that allows them to really integrate or access cannabis in a way that elevates the entire destination experience. And it's a really exciting time because of that, because cannabis is an enhancement tool and it is rooted in wellness. And it's going to be really exciting to watch this kind of next era unlock with cannabis also being included in the conversation. With that, I actually am going to share a couple slides and just do a little bit of education around the endocannabinoid system, which is the system that all of us have that actually works with the cannabis plant directly. Can we all see this slide, Cody? Is it showing?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, great. So what we learned is that the cannabis plant directly works with a system that's inside of all of us, right? As well as plants, as well as animals and other mammals. And what that system is called is the endocannabinoid system. And this is a system whose primary purpose is to bring your body into optimal balance or homeostasis. The first wellness or medical written documentation of cannabis as a medicine or a tool for wellness was from ancient China. And it really honors the yin and yang properties of the cannabis plant for promoting balance and wellness. And this really translates into how the cannabis plant works with our bodies. For one moment, I want to put the cannabis plant aside and explain to everybody at this webinar that Our endocannabinoid system that we all have is actually fully in operation without the cannabis plant. We internally produce two endocannabinoids that are consistently working to keep our body into optimum balance and to address anything that has gone maybe a bit awry or any inflammation in the body, that kind of thing. And then when we take the cannabis plant, whether it's topical, tincture, edible, drinkable, or other, it flushes that system with all of those therapeutic properties, and those are phytocannabinoids. So you have the endocannabinoid system, you have endocannabinoids, there's two of them that are fully functioning without the plant. And then when you take the plant, it flushes your body and it works at a higher level to bring your body into optimum balance. So just a little bit of biology of why cannabis and the cannabis travel trend is inherently rooted in wellness, because that is the principles of the cannabis plant. And I want to scroll down real quick to consumption. Here are 5 different pictures and applications. And this is something really important because a lot of people bring up, oh, it's like wine or it's like beer. And it absolutely is to a degree when you think of the effects part. But also cannabis has a lot of different types of application. And there's many products that have 0 THC in it, where it's just CBD or CBG or CBN. There's a lot of cannabinoids in the cannabis plant itself. And to compound that or to kind of pile on that concept of how wide-ranging and accessible cannabis is, it manifests in all these different applications, from transdermal patches to tinctures to edibles, drinkables, topicals, concentrates, and of course, the flower that people smoke, as well as vaporization and beyond. So it's going to be really exciting to see how cannabis evolves in the travel trend. I want to jump really quickly too into some data. Is that appropriate, Cody, to jump in and do a couple high-level data points on the cannabis travel audience, or do you want to save that for later?
No, this is please dive in.
Okay, great. So my company is Cultivar Strategies, Cultivar Brands. We have an amazing team. And what we do is we help develop strategy at the intersection of cannabis and travel around this trend, and everything is data-driven. And I want to share a couple of these data points with the audience today. So Cultivar Strategies teamed up with MMGY Travel Intelligence, and we did a national survey on the cannabis motivated travel audience and who they are, how they self-identify, what are their behaviors, media habits, etc. And I pulled out a couple specific data points that I wanted to share to kind of level set for this webinar. First off is the audience size. What we learned is that the cannabis motivated travel audience equates to 29% of the active leisure travel audience in the United States. So it's 29% of the active leisure travel audience, which equates to 18% of all Americans. And here's what we found is they travel more often. The cannabis motivated traveler takes 3.5 trips a year versus an average of 2.9 trips a year for the active leisure travel audience. So this is an audience that travels more often. It also goes across generations. You see that from millennials to boomers, that, you know, this is across the board. This traveler travels more often than the average active leisure traveler. And then we looked at what experiences are they really drawn toward? What are they looking to experience while in a destination? And what we found is that visiting a cannabis shop is the primary interest, followed by trying a CBD or THC edible or beverage. So not to mention the fourth one down is a spa treatment, followed by simply understanding that they are able to sample cannabis in a safe environment like a lounge or a licensed consumption space. So this is some of the discoveries. And notice none of them really lean into inhalation. Which was another pattern that we saw, that the method of ingestion that this audience was interested in really was more kind of spa, topical driven, as well as drinkable and edible. What we also learned is a quarter of these travelers have already traveled to a destination to have a cannabis experience. So these people are already moving about a market. We found out they're a drive market audience even prior to COVID, and they're already traveling there. So the question then becomes, how do you expand that audience and how do you keep them in market and curate the market in a normalized way so they're able to spread their spend out and maybe visit an art exhibit or a really great restaurant or stay the night and make it more of a bundled trip. So that was a very exciting discovery. 44% of millennials and Gen Zers have already done so as far as traveling to a destination for cannabis. So what's the synopsis? An existing drive-minded, cannabis-motivated audience exists. They travel often, stay longer, and spend more in a destination. And that's what the data shows. We also learned that about 30% of this cannabis-motivated travel audience has never tried cannabis. So these are people that are hearing about quality of life and how cannabis is a tool for wellness, and they want to go places to learn more about this and how to incorporate it.
Fantastic, Brian, for really setting the stage and painting maybe changing some of the stereotypes that might be out there in terms of the cannabis traveler and the cannabis scene. Now, I'd love to move on to Todd. What brought Visit Modesto to take charge and really take the leap and get into this space officially?
It's not like we just said, wow, we have cannabis shops, let's take a deep dive. And for the listening audience, I think if you experienced what I did when I first heard those facts and figures from Brian, it was a big aha moment. And Andres and I sat down. We were invited to join the Cal Travel Started Cannabis Tourism Committee. And then we were presented in the first two meetings with all those facts and figures that Brian just walked everybody through. And when Andres and I sat down after the second meeting, we said, wait a second, the intersect of the Canna Curious and the Connoisseur and the Canna Traveler are literally at the same juncture of who we want to promote to. They're foodies, they're into wine, they're outdoorsy, they're dog lovers, and they stay longer and they spend more in market. So to us, it was, wow, let's take a look at this. So that was the tipping point for our leap. If maybe I shouldn't call it a leap. That was the tipping point for our dipping the toe in the water, reaching out to Brian. And then Andres and I had quite a few meetings with Brian one-on-one over the coming months between July last year and December when we presented it to our board.
Wow. As a quick reminder to anybody on the call, feel free to type your questions in the Q&A to either Todd, Brian, or Andres, and we'll make sure to try and answer them as much as possible. But Todd, what was it like being the first? It's the logic's there, the data's there, but at the end of the day, you can't go and call, X DMO down the street and say, hey, what did you do wrong, or what should I avoid?
I don't believe we ever really took a look at it and say, wow, we're the first. So, giddy up, how do we do this? I think it was more of okay, being first, what are all the I's we have to dot and T's we have to cross, both within our hospitality community, with our board, with local leadership, with government, with our partners in the community. And then, of course, on the legal side and on the cannabis side, how do we go about making this an appropriate program? And we engaged Bandwango originally back at the beginning of this year. So it was kind of a perfect juncture of being able to say, there's a way we can do this and do it intelligently, carefully, and really provide both an experience that mitigates risk on our side and on our partner side, as well as present something that's unique and memorable and says, wow, Modesto, we need to go there.
For sure. How do you work with some of your partners or stakeholders that are maybe non-believers and help turn them into advocates? I know you mentioned legal and we talked earlier about a unique story where someone walked into your office, sat down and said, convince me.
Yeah, I'm going to give two examples. One, I think that points directly at your question is the newspaper, the local newspaper, when they came in and did an interview with us, one of the questions was, okay, Todd, cannabis was controversial when it was first rolled out in the community. We're a red and blue community. There are a lot of conservatives, a lot of liberals. How do you feel that you're going to be able to change people's minds? And I said, well, gosh, if the last 18 months didn't teach us anything, it's taught us that you can't change people's minds. So we're not out to do that, Cody. And I think that for anybody who goes down this road, don't think you're going to change minds. But like Brian just presented, having facts and figures is important. So that gentleman who came into my office, who actually is a guy I've known a long time and an attorney, I presented him with the facts and figures, and then I gave him the tax facts and figures for cannabis in our community and for occupancy tax. So for instance, in Modesto, two of the highest revenue areas to budget through the pandemic were cannabis and occupancy. We ran very high occupancy compared to the country last year, in the last fiscal year, and cannabis produced at a very high level. In taxes, it was actually 3.2 million in taxes locally. So you're not going to convince anybody. I wouldn't make that time. And Andres and I talked about it quite a bit, and it is what it is. Just dot your I's, cross your T's.
Yeah. Can I jump in real quick, Cody, to add something to that?
Please.
You know, a lot of this is just education and case studies and data. And that committee that Todd mentioned, you know, been chairing that now for over a year with the California Travel Association, and I commend them for spinning up that committee, because it's been a resource for data, case studies, and that's really how Cultivar Strategies evolved, was doing this spot work as cannabis normalized with hotels and tour companies and attractions, and learning all the pain points of what exists, where are all the solution suites that are needed, and then presenting those in applicable form for work that we did with hotels and markets, you know, waiting kind of for the DMO to get to a point where they were comfortable being, okay, this has been legal since 2018. You know, these are all the pain points. People are canceling dinner plans. There's frontline staff recommending unlicensed services that aren't even the products aren't going through the test. All these gaps were so apparent. And it's all about just sharing information, case studies, and data. And then I agree with Todd. It's really waiting for people to meet them where they're at, whether it's what is a cannabis leaf, or whether it's who is the audience, or is it, you know, what did this hotel do and why was it successful? And then when they're ready, you develop a kind of a customized plan for that destination that's more holistic. So it's all coordinated instead of patchwork. Now it's exciting. And this is where Modesto was visionary, and hats off to Todd and his team, because it's a coordinated product and plan instead of just a standalone retailer saying, here's my address. It's more of a normalized experience. That's what's really exciting about it.
Yeah, and create a safer destination traveler experience by starting with education at the very core. And that's kind of what we hold true as we dive down and go into this industry, which is really just education. We create a safer destination and make it a safer experience for our travelers.
And that education, to build on what Andres just said, what we're finding with the destinations we're working with is that comes in the form of meetings with economic development, the mayor. It's getting the conversation current through data, case studies, so we can actually have intelligent conversations and understand and be able to make a plan together with similar information.
Yeah, and you essentially answered this question, but I think, you know, this is why, but why is it so important for the DMO to be the one that's really driving the conversations around this?
There's a lot of reasons for that. Number one, DMOs they're on a separate funding line from government, and they're able to do things that are sometimes a little bit whack without anybody getting overtly concerned about tax dollars. I think that helps a little bit. The other thing is DMOs, as Brian just did with Cultivar, bring facts and figures and data to the table. So it's no different than Andres and I going through the data we went through this morning that we're getting out of Bandwango, or what we're preparing with Zydeco, and being able to have intelligent destination economic impact conversations. If you keep the conversation up here and keep talking about safety, as Andres pointed out, you're kind of building a case for why is this different than a wine passport, a beer passport, or even a taco passport.
Absolutely. Brian, anything to add there? Or I've got a Q&A that came in from the chat.
Yeah, I have one thing to add, and that is, the travel industry is at a really unique juncture as well. Really looking at it more as a destination management lens. And cannabis is unique in that way. And that's kind of where Cultivar really lives as well. We've kind of continued to evolve our model to parallel that travel, lens. And the way that this manifested in Modesto is really elevating some of the local craft and local brands. And there were conversations that started to center not just around travel, but what is the cannabis brand of this destination and what makes it special? And how are we going to elevate the licensed operators, whether it's a retailer or manufacturer? What is the secret sauce? And it turns out that Modesto has, with its long agricultural history, has some of the best breeders and like geneticists in California, according to them, right? With some really great history and culture and storytelling, and even specific types of varietals or cultivars of cannabis that they specialize in. So being able to unearth where a destination might live in the greater cannabis conversation and how that dovetails into the travel strategy. And that's kind of a destination development discussion of how do we interconnect people, but also how do we support the cannabis industry and how that cannabis brand and industry weaves into the greater travel strategy of the destination.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that same note, in terms of some of the technical aspects, we have a question in, given that, it's still illegal on the federal level, what types of restrictions are around marketing and advertising? For example, obviously you're not marketing to minors, but do you have a billboard within 500 feet of a school? How do you minimize your liability if somebody buys your product and then, gets pulled over on state lines? So just one of the technical questions there.
I'm going to push that one over to Andres. He did the research on that.
Yeah, so there's a few things. Number one, because we weren't selling any actual product, there were some things that didn't necessarily apply to us because we weren't selling the product, we were educating. Second, when you went to advertise or attempt to advertise on Facebook Ads Manager, there were restrictions around cannabis-related keywords. So we didn't run any advertising or any paid marketing dollars. This was completely organic. What we did do on our website is create a barrier that says you have to be 21 or older to access that web page. And then we created sub pages to basically lay out our bylaws for the program and talk about any legal verbiage that we need to have on our website to promote this in the proper way. But we really didn't we didn't spend any advertising dollars on this. This was completely organic. But again, a lot of the things that we didn't have to do were because we're not selling an actual product. We're just educating around the topic.
Awesome.
The other piece of that puzzle, though, is I think it's important with your stakeholders, knowing they're both going to be conservative and liberal and pro-cannabis, anti-cannabis. We made a commitment. This is not something we're going to be putting on billboards. The newspaper is coming out with a cannabis weekly section. We're not going to advertise in that. This is not something we want to say, hey, cool, look at Modesto. We want to keep the concept of the program at an intelligent level and let it do its justice appropriately so that our community is comfortable. We are the first. And for the next couple of years, it's going to be like post-prohibition in the 1930s.
No, excellent. All excellent points. Brian, a great question for you. The baby boomer market, obviously is still a significant market in the travel space. What is the baby boomer market in the cannabis world?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two that are really present in the baby boomers. One is the generation that was part of that summer of love era. So they're familiar with cannabis and they haven't used it for a while. And they're like, wow, there's cannabis appellations that are starting in California next year. And maybe I should revisit this. And it's exciting for them because what they're finding is now when you're not purchasing or using cannabis on the traditional market, now it's legal. You know what you're getting, you know how strong that strain is, right? So this consumer who's like, I can't smoke the cannabis I smoked back in the day because it's too strong. They learn that it's just like craft beer or non-alcoholic beer to highly alcoholic and everything on that spectrum in between. cannabis has the same offering, and it's not just in joints or pre-rolls, it's also in beverages, right? Like Lagunitas, which many are familiar with, which is a California craft beer. They have one of the highest selling cannabis beverages on the market in California right now, called Hi-Fi Hops. And they have different SKUs. They have a CBD one, they have kind of a microdosed or a 5 milligram one, and they have a 10 milligram one. So the evolution of this cannabis space from a product vantage point for that baby boomer consumer is really interesting. And then you have the ones that don't have any prior experience with cannabis, but they're really interested in how can this elevate my quality of life, and this is really from that wellness, even replacing pills and such. People are finding that the cannabis plant is really a toolkit for wellness and health. And that is drawing in a consumer, and that speaks to that 30% of that cannabis motivated travel audience that's never tried cannabis. So where do I start? And I find a really great entry point is topical. And I just want to touch one other thing on the marketing side that Andres and Todd were speaking to, is it's always important to remember that with cannabis travel strategy, there's all this lead up into marketing THC where you get altered product. There's education, there's data, there's even hemp products that are non-consumable, like even just on-trend art that has a cannabis leaf or a nod to what's happening in the pop culture is a strategy. Preparing your staff, you can get to that THC altered state discussion, but I want to remind people that there's an arc that leads there, because this is a very unique travel trend in many ways, and there's a pathway you need to carve before you're marketing or sharing with the world about the kind of altered state part of this very big conversation.
Yeah, and on that note, for the boomers, real quick, the wellness side, helping boomers understand, and I use a lot of stories that I've experienced with boomers of using a CBD only patch, 0 THC, for people who have pain and arthritis and nerve pain. My brother's a flower child and got busted in the 60s smoking pot, but his wife has nerve damage, and I took him into a cannabis shop to get a CBD patch for her, and he was cracking up. He had never been in one. So it ties into that education and experience, but I think the wellness is a really important lead-in in that generation.
Excellent. Awesome. Thanks so much. And I think that brings us to a really great segue. Obviously, a lot of work was done prior to Bandwango stepping in. And now, we came to the table with everyone here as a team. Talk a bit about, maybe for Todd and Andres, tell us about, the creation of this pass and this experience. How did you, onboard partners? What were your considerations? And how did you come about creating this experience?
A couple things that were unique, and I appreciate Brian bringing it to the table. We used a top 10 concept. So first, Brian worked with us to identify a key partner in the cannabis industry, and in our case, it's Cookies. The owner of the local Cookies has a hospitality background. We introduced Brian to those partners, and then we began working with the corporate office on a strategy of how to roll it out. So Cookies became the starting point for our registration and swag bag pickup. So we created something experiential that we could track inside of Bandwango and provide the visitor or the registrant. But just as importantly, the top 10 for the local market was more important than bringing partners in. It was the idea of sending people who were going to Cookies, registering, and sending them out into the community so that they weren't just stopping at Cookies, picking something up, or another retailer picking something up and leaving. We found out from our cannabis retail partners that several months ago, almost 40% of the business came from outside the city. So we wanted to create something that would keep people inside the city and experiencing the city, and having the Bandwango passport allowed us to do that. And yes, we reached out to other partners to create some offers since the pass's launch. They're now coming to us. We're adding more partners into the passport for check-ins. And then we're learning about the the actual registrants at a very high level as well. Like I said, Andres and I were going over data this morning. So I think those are the technical aspects leading into how we used the passport and decided to build the passport.
Yeah, and from the marketing aspect, it really just came down again to education, talking to other businesses that are in the industry and how they market and things to look out for, such as keywords when you're even how you list the information on your website. So really just education, really just taking a deep dive into the industry and seeing how we can do this in a smart and educated way. And again, kind of in that technical aspect is really just having those conversations before we even go into a rollout phase.
Awesome. And Andres, how did the Bandwango technology change your usual approach to, maybe a more traditional paper trail?
So really with Bandwango, what we were able to do is really see the analytics and the insights on the back end and see what these travelers were doing once they downloaded the pass, where they were going, what businesses they were redeeming their prizes at, and really just seeing the data. Okay, how many people are registering? Oh, well, what did we market that week? What did we not market? Again, one of the biggest things, as Todd was mentioning, we were having a conversation over the numbers today, and we were able to see that the CannaPass had 232 redemptions in 30 days with no marketing, all organic. And then we were able to see the numbers of people redeeming swag bags, then the number of people that actually redeemed their prizes, and then where did they go? And we're able to kind of take that data, take a step back and see like, okay, what's working and what's not. So that's really where Bandwango's technology kind of brings that value add, is we're able to see what the participants are doing and where they're going and really have valuable data and insights.
Yeah, and I think the second piece of that puzzle, Cody, is you prefaced your question with how is using Bandwango different than from the typical paper trail. So for the past 2 years, even before the pandemic, we made a very powerful commitment to going digital at Visit Modesto, and that's one of the reasons that Andres is on board with us, and he's blowing it away. So it actually fit right into our goals for the organization as to how we're going to increase our tourism reach, increase awareness of the benefits in the community, whether it's farm stands, wine, cuisine, or just taking hikes on some of the trails, and of course, cannabis. So Bandwango offered us that opportunity to create something that ties into our technical digital process for marketing.
Amazing. Thank you. And I know we talked a little bit about the launch and kind of how we launched it in terms of, you mentioned it's all organic, you're not on billboards, you're not in the Cannabis Weekly. What were some of the tactics that you had used when you went to launch the pass?
So we had actually prepared to send out a press release letting our local paper know first from a marketing standpoint. But we felt what was more important, and Andres, Brian, and I put together a program to educate our partners. And Brian came down 2 weeks before our release, and we did an actual about 15-minute FAQ between what is it and why are we doing it and who is the consumer. So Brian and I did a back and forth. People can watch that on YouTube. The second piece of that puzzle was Andres and his team went out and actually developed videos on how to use the passport and how to redeem for check-ins. So that was both for our partners who were going to have check-ins at their business, but also to show the consumer how to do it. So we did all that in preparation to launch. Well, interestingly enough, when we sent out that information to our partners and the FAQs, someone tipped off the paper before we even sent our press release, and it turned into a very large article after an interview with Brian and myself in the paper. And we've just stood back ever since that. Forbes picked it up, Entrepreneur picked it up, Yahoo News picked it up, TransCanada sent out a financial press release. So we've kind of let it do its organic thing. The PR helped us more than anything else. And it wasn't even purposeful at that point. We're just getting ready to do our next level of PR. The flip side, though, Cody, is that's when all the questions started. Now it was on the front page of the newspaper. Now, people are coming in with guns blazing. I've had more meetings in the last 9 days about one subject that I have to repeat over and over than I've had about anything in my life, including my kids breaking rules at home.
Wow. No, that's amazing. And I can see that even just based on some of the questions that are coming in. And I will get to those. Since the passport is launched, maybe Andres, can you walk us through what type of data you're seeing and how you're tracking the success of this pass?
Yeah. So some of the data that we're seeing through Bandwango's tool of tracking information is the redemptions, swag bag pickups, and what businesses. And then we're also able to compare this pass along with our other passes and see the difference there, and see not only specific to one pass, but as a overarching umbrella, we're able to compare topics and see what consumers are gravitating towards. Right now, consumers are gravitating towards the CannaPass. This is really a hot topic. People are gravitating towards this. They're using it. They're engaged. So that data is pretty valuable. That's very valuable data for us because, again, it's almost counterintuitive because we're diving into this new space where you would think that traditional topics would perform better, but no, the cannabis industry and sector is kind of what's performing the best on the consumer side, which is huge for us. And then we're matching that with our Google Analytics, with our organic social, with our YouTube social, with our Google, and kind of seeing how everything fits together. But again, really one of the high value points is comparing the topics of the different passports that we run through Bandwango.
Yeah, so we launched Modesto Loves Dogs over 90 days ago. We actually have more signups for Modesto Loves Dogs than the CannaPass, and we market the crumbs out of Modesto Loves Dogs. And the redemptions for the CannaPass are more than double of the redemptions for Modesto Loves Dogs. And Modesto Loves Dogs had probably 10 times the amount of places that you can redeem and get discounts and things, and even swag. We even gamified it. So and it's not just picking up the swag. Even the business redemptions of the CannaPass are higher than Modesto Loves Dogs. So that's telling us a lot of what Brian was pointing at about the Canna curious Canna user, that they spend more, they travel more, they do more within the environment. So Bandwango is helping us quite a bit with that. We're going to be layering Zartico on it. We've already engaged Zartico, and we're going to be able to see what do they stay overnight when they go to a cannabis retailer. Where do they go next? We're not going to tell anybody where they go next, but we're going to be able to see, are they going to restaurants, are they going to activities, or are they jumping back on the freeway, and a lot more. And also, of course, where they come from. We also know that it's about 42% of all the registrants are not from Modesto. So that Bandwango brings that to the table, and we're using that data. It's helping me in my conversations with the city when now that they're finger wagging, and everybody knew about it in advance, but now they're finger wagging. It's not uncommon.
And if it's okay, Cody, I'd like to build on that, because that's where, when Cultivar works with a destination, there's 3 phases. There's the stakeholder engagement, educating, bringing the conversation current, phase 1, and then toolkit, destination preparedness, assets, training, and providing things in hands that are consumer facing as well to help prepare a destination, especially frontline hospitality staff, and also creating the collateral and putting in those toolkits around the cannabis travel guide. What was amazing with this in Modesto is we met you guys, and it brought a digital layer that layered on top of that cannabis travel guide. And what's really exciting on the Cultivar angle as well is understanding how this traveler moves about in market and where are they going after the dispensary, like Todd said, because cannabis is an enhancement tool, especially when you start looking at the THC component. And it's a great complement or precursor to art or food. And what they're finding is it kind of does this targeted sensory enhancement depending on what kind of cannabis product you're consuming. So starting to understand how this traveler moves about in market, and Bandwango's technology allows for these deep insights around this traveler profile, which is really exciting. So we're thrilled.
And I think that Bandwango brought a layer of safety to the traveler and to our partners that most people aren't aware of, and it may answer one of the questions or two questions out there. That, you know, Brian told us, and we all know that this happens, that people often go to a hospitality person, whether it's at a restaurant, but very common in a hotel. Hey, where do I get blank? And right, even in Canna legal destinations, the response often is, hey, I don't know, but let me call my cousin Vinny. And there's a black market still for cannabis products, but there is a legal access. And by having Bandwango, it allows us to provide, and we developed a whole program around it and collateral. It allows the frontline workers to direct people to MoTown CannaPass.com. They go in there, they register for the passport that's a Bandwango product, and now they're going down this legal access path that provides them not only with benefits, but the right thing to do with lists of do's and don'ts and what are local laws. So Bandwango brings that element to the table of, here's the right way to do it. Nobody's going to a destination and saying, where can I buy illegal whiskey? You know, but so we don't want that to happen in the Canna audience.
Well, that's a great point. And, you know, I think as well, you know, first party data is always really, really important. We all know that that's kind of the gold out there. How have you used the past to help segment and build new audiences that you can kind of communicate to? And maybe Andres, you could answer that for us.
I don't even know if we're there yet, unless you see something I'm not seeing, Andres.
So the first thing that comes to mind with this is really when it comes to using the emails really for continued information and communication towards that database and building the database. Not only that, with the passport, because we're able to integrate that within within the web pages on our website, we're able to then pixelate the traffic there to continue to retarget them through other avenues such as Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, etc. Again, on top of email. So we're able to use that data and that flow to go and download the pass. So again, pixelate our web page. Let's retarget them with future programs, and let's have this data and use it in future programs. Again, we haven't dove deep into the actual tactical use of that yet, but that's kind of where I'm foreseeing and where we're foreseeing that as a team. Which is based off of other tactics and strategies, which is we bring people in, let's continue to retarget them with other information that they're interested in to get them here to Modesto and enjoying our destination of fun in a fun and safe way.
Amazing, thanks. And I'm going to jump to the Q&A now, and there's a couple questions for Brian. Before we ask those questions, Brian, I heard that you had a real world exchange with a pass holder in cookies. And so maybe you want to tell the team, because, you know, we all love looking at numbers, but when you run into somebody on the street in real life, it's pretty great.
Yeah, absolutely. So the last market visit, you know, I went to Cookies, which I want to get into in a minute too. And there was a visitor that had a newspaper, I think it was covered up in Sacramento at the Sacramento Bee, and they had driven down from Sacramento to be on the CannaPass to go to Cookies and to have a cannabis experience as a day trip from Sacramento. They were baby boomers, I'd say. And they were there for the experience, and they were thrilled that there was a curated place where it felt normalized. They were able to go into a well-curated dispensary retail and really get that cannabis 101 education that they wanted. They were already familiar with cannabis, but having this safe spot to go to in a curated way really reached out to them and caused them to travel down from Sacramento. And this kind of speaks to why this is special as well. And that safety layer that Todd mentioned. So within this cannabis travel guide and this CannaPass and this program, it's driving visitors to an above board, well curated, normalized cannabis retail experience. And when we work with Cookies, when Cultivar worked with Cookies with Visit Modesto, we actually go in there and do training with the Cookies staff about what does it mean to be part of the travel industry? What does it mean to be a jump off point for curated itineraries where you have partners, restaurants, art galleries, other people participating in this cannabis pass? Also, what does it mean to have hospitality 101 skills? And we actually work with the retail shop to understand hospitality 101, the cannabis curious visitor versus the cannabis connoisseur visitor, and how those are two different conversations. And when people show up to Cookies Modesto, they get greeted at the door and they have a one-on-one experience where it's basically a handheld VIP shopper experience. So they really feel like they're getting a destination experience as a visitor versus just another retail shop walking into it. And that's, again, that connective tissue that brings it all together and really provides that safety element. And when it comes to the traditional market or the black market that Todd mentioned, we're in an era right now that was really similar kind of to alcohol back in the early 1900s. And there was this whole speakeasy issue where there was a lot of alcohol places popping up, unlicensed, untested, people making moonshine. Now, cannabis is in that same space, which is why it's so important to be able to drive visitors and residents, quite frankly, to above board, licensed, safe, tested product retailers. Because especially today with technology and delivery, it's really hard sometimes to understand if it's truly a licensed, safe business or not. And this is one of the major kind of safety issues that is solved by having something like the CannaPass or a cannabis travel guide to be able to drive people to local licensed retailers that are paying taxes, offering safe medicine, safe products, and doing things the right way. And we also integrated rideshare and safe transport. So it's really a little toolkit for how do I access cannabis experiences in a really safe way with guardrails, with a well-trained jump-off point dispensary that understands what is a hospitality experience. And that's part of the full experience of the CannaPass.
As you can tell, there's a lot more work in this than your typical pass on the ground of what has to be done. Now, Brian touched base on the fact that somebody came from Sacramento, which is 90 miles away. There are a lot of places you can go between here and there to get cannabis. So going back to that analytics question someone had, I pulled up our Google Analytics because we usually wait 30 days to see. Now we're going to intersect this with Bandwango, but our Google Analytics on the CannaPass are significantly different than our regular Google Analytics on the cities of origin. So we'll use that in the next phase, Cody.
Oh, I appreciate that. Brian, there are two questions for you. How do you know when a destination is ready to kind of jump in? And then secondly, how do you best bring local government officials, the DMO leadership, local businesses to the table to actually move this concept forward?
So as far as ready to jump in, my belief is if you are in a legal, adult use legal destination, whether it's a state or a city, this is already happening. So I would venture to say your responsibility for providing safety, not just for visitors, but also for hospitality industry professionals, we're there. Like, get some education and training and some basic assets to keep behind the counter at concierge or frontline staff. For ones that want to be a little more forward, you start looking at kind of the cannabis assets in the market, which really, you look at the public facing access to retail shops, as well as lounges and experiences. So where can visitors access while they're in market to have a really cool cannabis experience? So we look at retail shops that are open door, as well as lounges. Cannabis delivery is legal throughout the entire state, just to be clear on that. So even if your jurisdiction or municipality doesn't have licensed retail shops that are storefronts or lounges, there's still legal deliveries happening every day in your backyard. So we look for great retail, great lounges. We also look for geographic, right? So, there's still some cities or locations that really put cannabis operators in the warehouse district with bars on the windows. And then there's other ones that are allowing those businesses to integrate geographically in a normalized way. And so we really also look for, are there retailers and lounges that are kind of near the tourist centers? Because those are the most mature markets that are usually ready to start making really compelling moves in this travel trend space. And the second question was about bringing in the stakeholders, right? So we really we serve the DMO. So it's really, as we're deployed by the DMO, and every destination is different, we're learning more and more how different, right? And but our goal is to be a resource and bring the data, the case studies, and to give people the information they need to be able to analyze and and come to their own conclusion, whether it's a new one because there's more information now, or whether, they dig their heels in and they need more information. But we understand the stigma is real, and we don't judge based on that. We really come in just to be a resource for data, case studies, information, and then help the stakeholders understand what they have in market, and kind of cast a vision of like, here's the opportunities that we see. How does this feel? And then together getting buy-in and working closely with the DMO, following the DMO's lead, is how we approach that.
Yeah, and Cody, I think the DMO has homework to do, really important. Find out how many cannabis retailers you have in your community. We found out that our county had about 24 at the time, and a couple still coming online. We were able to go to Brian's team with, here's the data on our market. When we engaged Brian's team, we went a little bit deeper with them, and we found out that there were actually production facilities, indoor production facilities, which helped us understand that there were literally over 500 employees locally in the industry, if not more. So that when we went to our stakeholders, we had that information. And with again, engaging Brian's team before you do that, will help you with your board and your stakeholders.
Awesome. Appreciate that. That's a really good rundown. There's a really specific situational question. So Todd, I'm not even going to paraphrase it because I don't want to butcher it. But we all know these questions come up, and we have to be ready to answer them right away. So one attendee is wanting to know, DMOs typically don't list liquor stores or medical supply shops on your website, right? So why would you list cannabis retailers? And if the answer is, well, because we list bars and distilleries, the argument is yes, but you can legally consume the product at the bar. You can't necessarily legally consume it at the cannabis location. So it's a little bit different. How do you kind of handle those types of inquiries?
I think there's a couple things briefly. The governments of the United States all over the place push no drinking and driving. We hear that all the time. So everybody knows that safety aspect. It's not coming out for cannabis. The second piece of the puzzle, like Brian said, there's not moonshine. You can't buy moonshine, but you can buy black market cannabis. The state of California also has a limit on the on the, I guess, intensity. I'm not a user. Brian would be able to answer it, but how much THC can be in a product, and how much can be purchased on a daily basis. And if we're not providing these 30% of all travelers, 29% of all travelers with information about how to do this legally, safely, intelligently, and within the local law, we're not doing the right thing. If it's 30% of travelers, then we need to pay attention to it. We all do beer passports. We have wine programs. This is just one more program that helps the traveling audience who uses this product understand how to use it, where to get it, and what's legal. Little things like in our do's and don'ts. Don't travel over state lines. Do's and don'ts. Don't go on federal land and use this. That means don't go to the national park and start doing your product. So we actually have an obligation as a DMO because it is such a new industry. And the number of travelers it represents such a high percentage of all travelers.
Amazing. That's awesome. What's next? Now that you've got the pass, what's kind of on your roadmap for the next 6 to 12 months?
We are not launching a Tesla to the moon. So that's somebody else's job. I think it's really maintaining the educational aspects, growing the partners that are with us inside of the Bandwango Pass, learning more about how we can communicate with individuals, and taking advantage with Andres and his team of the organic capabilities that we can use. Bandwango gives us the access to communicate with all of the registrants on a one-to-one personalized basis. So for instance, we know that over 100 registrants have not picked up a swag bag. We can talk to them about that. We can give them a hotel promotion. There may be a weekend program that ties in food and wine, or a flower fest in the region. So we now have tools that we can communicate with this type of traveler, this type of new tourist destination partner, and let them take advantage of our community in a safe and legal fashion.
Amazing. And Brian, what's next for Cultivar?
Yeah, well, we're very excited. I mean, Modesto specifically, we're kind of creating the next phase roadmap, Milestones. And it's exciting. We're doing a little more work with the trend-setting hotels that really want to embrace this and kind of differentiate at different inputs. So that's happening. That's in motion. Like Todd said, we're looking at events and kind of seasonal collaborations with other local institutions and attractions. That's going to connect these retailers that want to be part of the travel industry in a really meaningful way as part of the destination. So we're going to continue to innovate and do exciting things. And that's across all fronts. Like, let's not forget that includes hemp CBD, which is federally legal. And so it's not always that narrow THC discussion. There's a lot of exciting things on the horizon for Modesto and other destinations that kind of have this vision and are excited about this travel trend.
Yeah, and I know we only have a couple minutes left, Cody, but I want to emphasize to our peers out there, if you're going to go down this road, be prepared. Don't be a smarty pants, but be smart. Know your facts, know your figures, engage a partner to work with you like Cultivar, because it separates you from the retailers. I don't actually start dialogue with retailers, nor does Andres. We go through Brian and his team at Cultivar to engage those relationships and develop effect pairings on that side, not on our side. So we're not promoting what to do or which to purchase. They're helping with that on the retailer side. And be prepared, be really prepared, both in the cannabis industry, because you are like, hi, I'm with the government and I'm here to help. Click, you're going to get that. And on the other side of it is, even after you launch, you're going to get hammered. You're going to get negative press. Be prepared for it, and don't be defensive. It's okay. Just have your facts and figures. Make sure you go to your board, from your board to your city partners, and have those steps all lined up, or reach out to any one of us. And on the marketing side, talk to Andres, because he found out what's legal and what's not legal. You don't want to get shut down on Instagram and Facebook and TikTok. That's a bad thing. So I'll zip it right there. Sorry, Cody.
No, that's great. That's fantastic. For people that want to learn more about the CannaPass, Todd or Andres, where can they go to kind of see some of the assets you've developed?
Well, you have to go watch the YouTube video that Andres and his team conceived and put out on how to promote the pass on our YouTube channel. So that's Visit Modesto on our YouTube channel. I'll let you take it from there, Andres, all the other areas they can learn about it.
Yeah, so if you just go to MoTown CannaPass.com, all of our information is there, as well as that YouTube video that Todd just mentioned. We have it hyperlinked there. So if you just go to MoTown CannaPass.com. Everything's there.
Awesome. And Brian, we have one last question that came in, but then as well, I'd love for you to just let people know on the call how they can get a hold of your team. But do you work with the cruise industry, and is CBD retail available for that?
We haven't worked with the cruise industry yet. And as far as CBD or hemp applications, yes, there's options. It depends on whether it's topical, consumable, internal ingestion, or whether it's a hemp postcard with the cannabis themed art on the front. So there's definitely integration points and training and opportunities, not just for, risk mitigation and safety, but also incremental revenue. But we'd have to dig in with whatever cruise line to talk about international waters, what's possible, where's the ship traveling, who are the stakeholders, and start at that stakeholder level.
Amazing. And so how can people get a hold of you to work with you in the future? Oh, we might have just lost it. There he is.
I clicked the wrong thing. So yeah, you can email me directly at Brian with an I at cultivarbrands.com. That's CULTIVAR brands.com. We have a splash page up currently. We're going to be launching our full website soon, but if you go to cultivarstrategies.com, you can get a kind of a sneak peek into what we have cooking and what kind of parties we work with or support. And please reach out with any questions. It's an exciting trend, and there's a lot of opportunity, and it comes in all kinds of forms, including wellness being a central point. So we're excited to hear from you.
And Cody, I want to add a big shout out to Bandwango as well, because the Bandwango team embraced this from the get-go, and they made it easy to build this passport intelligently and smoothly. So big shout out to Bandwango on that.
Thanks so much. Well, I want to thank the three of you so much for being on the call today. For those that want more information, we are going to be putting this recording on bandwango.com. So feel free to forward off to your friends and peeps. And we'll also make sure to include the links to Brian, Todd, and Andres information as well in there. Thank you both, or thank all three of you so much for joining us today. And I hope you have a good rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Cody.
Bye.